I don't know if this letter will ever find its way home. The post lines have been unreliable for weeks now, and sometimes the trucks carrying our mail never return. But tonight, as the wind howls through the broken shutters of our aid station, I feel an ache to write not about the war itself, but about what it's done to us inside. It's cold again. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes even breathing feel like a small effort. We've been stationed near the edge of a captured German village, or what's left of it. The roofs are gone, the church bell is silent, and the snow mixes with soot in the air. Our field hospital used to be a schoolhouse. The children's desks still line the walls, some with tiny names carved into the wood. I can't help but wonder if those same children are now somewhere beyond these lines, or gone altogether every day. The wounded come in, American, British, sometimes French, and lately German too. At first, I hesitated when they brought the enemy in. Their gray uniforms, their accents, the symbols stitched onto their collars. They stirred something cold in my chest. I thought of the boys they had killed, the villages they'd burned. But when I pressed my hand against their wounds, the blood was the same color. The cries sounded the same. That realization has haunted me more than I can explain. There was one, a young German soldier, no older than 19, brought in 2 nights ago. A bullet had torn through his shoulder, and he kept calling for his mother in a language I only half understood. One of our men spat near his stretcher, muttering that we should leave him to die. I didn't answer. Instead, I took his trembling hand and told him, as gently as I could, that he wasn't alone. I don't know if he understood, but he stopped crying after that. Sometimes I think comfort doesn't need translation. I cleaned his wound and stitched it in silence. The other nurses avoided looking at me. They think I'm too soft, perhaps even foolish, for tending to those who would have shot us without hesitation. Maybe they're right. But Mother, when I looked at that boy, I didn't see a soldier anymore. I saw my brother, James, the way he looked the day he enlisted, proud, scared, and far too young. That night, I couldn't sleep. The snow had begun to fall heavier, and through the broken windows I could see the flakes gathering on the German's blanket. I rose and tucked it around him, careful not to wake him. He stirred once, whispering something that sounded like Danke. I pretended not to hear. I don't know what this war will make of us when it's done. We patch them up and send them away. And each time I feel a little more of my heart slip into the void between what is right and what is necessary. But I do know this: hate cannot be the only thing we take from all this suffering. If compassion dies here, then perhaps we've lost more than any battle could measure. The candles are burning low now, and the wounded have finally quieted. Somewhere outside, I can hear the faint sound of artillery in the distance, a reminder that dawn will bring more of the same. Still, for this one small moment, there's peace in this ruined room, and that, I think, is something worth writing down. With love, on a morning came gray and bitter. The frost on the inside of the window panes shimmered faintly as the first light crept through. The stove had long gone out, and the air in the room hung heavy with the scent of iodine and damp wool. I rose before the others, my hands stiff and raw from the cold, and checked on the German boy first. His fever had broken some time during the night. He slept with his mouth slightly open, his breath shallow but steady. I remember feeling an odd relief as though some small victory had been won, even if no one else would see it that way. When Sergeant Miller came in, he saw me changing the boy's bandage. He stopped in the doorway, jaw tight. "You're wasting supplies," he said flatly. "They wouldn't do the same for us." I didn't answer. There are moments here when words feel useless, when all that matters is the quiet rhythm of a heartbeat that hasn't yet stopped. He walked off, shaking his head, muttering something about how mercy had no place on the front. Maybe he's right, or maybe mercy is the only thing that separates us from the madness outside these walls. I keep thinking of the look in that boy's eyes last night, how it shifted from terror to trust. It was such a fragile thing, that trust, a flicker in a storm. Later that day, one of the wounded Americans, Private Ellis, asked why I bothered. "He'd pull the trigger on you if the tables were turned," he said. His face was pale beneath his bandages, his tone sharp but not cruel. "Maybe," I told him, "but not today. Today he's just a boy who's hurt." Ellis didn't say anything after that. When I came back an hour later, I saw him share a piece of his bread with the German. Small things like that happen quietly here, almost shyly, as if the men are afraid to be seen being kind. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. The village has gone silent, except for the occasional rumble of artillery far away. Sometimes I stand at the doorway just to listen. The world feels so still, it's hard to believe there's a war at all, until the wind shifts and carries the distant echo of guns. Then the illusion breaks. I caught sight of a small figure this afternoon, a girl, maybe 10 years old, darting between the ruins across the street. She wore a thin coat and carried something wrapped in cloth. I went out, calling softly, but she vanished behind the church wall before I could reach her. The locals avoid us, mostly. Fear runs deep on both sides. Still, I left a bit of bread on the windowsill that night. It was gone by morning. The German boy, his name is Karl, I learned, woke properly today. His voice was weak, but he tried to thank me. I smiled and told him to rest. When I changed his dressing, he stared at the red cross patch on my arm and whispered something I didn't understand, except for one word, Mensch, human. I suppose that's what we both were trying to remember. We stopped keeping count of the days. They blurred together now, stitched with pain and fleeting moments of grace. Sometimes I wonder if the war will end before we forget how to be gentle. The candles are nearly gone again. I'll save the last one for tomorrow, just in case hope needs light to find its way back here. Karl is stronger now. He can sit up on his own, though his arm still trembles when he tries to lift the tin cup to his lips. Each morning I bring him a little broth before tending to the others. He always says thank you in careful English, the words soft, almost shy. It's strange how quickly the sound of an enemy's voice can lose its threat. Once it's spoken gently, the others still keep their distance. Some of the soldiers refuse to look in his direction, and I can feel the quiet judgment in the room when I stop by his cot. But there's no anger anymore, only a sort of uneasy silence, like everyone is waiting for something to happen that never does. I think they're beginning to understand that mercy doesn't weaken us. It only asks something difficult, that we remember the world before all this killing began yesterday. I found Karl staring out the window at the snow. "It is beautiful," he said, "when it hides everything." I didn't answer right away. The way he said it, the way his eyes drifted over the ruins outside, I knew he wasn't talking about the snow. He was talking about memory, about what he wished could be covered and forgotten. He told me a little about his home, a farm near Castle, fields that turned gold in the summer, a sister who used to sing when she worked. He spoke with such longing it made my throat ache. For a moment I could almost see it: sunlight, wheat, laughter, not a uniform or a rifle in sight. I wonder if that's what heaven looks like to those of us who've lived through war. A return to the ordinary dot. Later in the afternoon, a new wave of wounded arrived. The floorboards shook as stretchers were carried in, boots scraping against wood, voices calling for morphine and water. The smell of blood hit us first, sharp and metallic. I worked until my hands cramped, until the bandages blurred in front of my eyes. When I finally stopped to breathe, I saw Carl watching quietly from his cot that night. As I was cleaning the instruments, he asked if I was afraid. All the time, I told him, but I've learned to hide it. He nodded slowly, and then, in halting English, he said, "Fear makes people cruel." I didn't know how to answer. Maybe that's the truest thing anyone's said to me out here after midnight. The shelling began again, distant at first, then closer. The kind that makes the walls tremble and dust fall from the ceiling. I moved from bed to bed, comforting whoever was awake. When I reached Carl's cot, he looked up and said, "You should hide." I almost laughed. "There's nowhere left to hide," I said. "Besides, the others need me." He closed his eyes for a long time, and I thought he'd drifted to sleep. But then he whispered, "You are not like the others." I wanted to tell him that I was no different, that anyone could do what I did, but I couldn't make myself believe it. The shelling stopped before dawn. The snow outside had turned gray with ash. When I stepped out to fetch more water, the horizon was glowing faintly, as if the world itself were smoldering. I don't know how much longer this war will last. Some say months, others say years. I only know that each day I feel both heavier and lighter. Heavy with what I've seen. Lighter because I've learned that even here, kindness still breathes. They gave the order this morning. All German wounded fit to travel are to be transferred to the nearest prisoner camp by week's end. The message came folded and stamped, its language clipped and cold, effective immediately. It said, as if lives could be packed away with such neat precision. When I read it aloud, Carl's face went still. He didn't ask questions, only nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I wanted to say something, anything, to soften the blow, but the words tangled in my throat. How do you explain that kindness, no matter how small, must always end where duty begins? Captain Harris called me into his office later. He's not a cruel man, just tired, like most of us. "You've done good work here, Anna," he said, his tone measured, his eyes distant. "But these are still the enemy. We can't afford sentiment." I told him I understood. He looked at me for a long moment and replied, "I'm not sure you do." Then he dismissed me with a nod. All day I moved through my rounds in silence. The air inside the aid station felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken farewells. Carl tried to help me once, reaching for a basin I'd dropped, but his hand shook too much. I caught it before it fell, and for a second our fingers brushed, that tiny human contact that feels almost forbidden here. "Will it be far?" he asked quietly. "Far enough," I said. but they'll take care of you." He smiled faintly. "You say that like you believe it." That night, I sat by his bed longer than I should have. He spoke of his sister again, of how she used to braid his hair when he was small. "She'd be ashamed if she knew I fought," he said softly. I told him that sisters never stop loving their brothers, no matter the uniform. He closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. I wiped it away before anyone could see. The others notice my quiet now. Some think I've gone soft. Others avoid me altogether, as if compassion might be contagious. Only Nurse Doyle, older and wise in her quiet way, touched my shoulder today and said, "You can't save them all, dear, but you can love the ones who cross your path." I think she meant it kindly, though it broke something in me to hear it. Tomorrow, the trucks come. The men are already building crates for supplies, preparing lists, counting bandages. The sound of hammers echoes through the hall like gunfire. Carl asked if I would come to the loading area to see him off. I told him yes, though I'm not sure I'll have the strength. Outside, the snow has turned to freezing rain. It taps against the windows like small, relentless fingers. Somewhere nearby, a wounded soldier dreams aloud, crying for his mother, for home, for anything but this. I wonder how many mothers are awake tonight, praying for children on both sides of the wire. If kindness is treason, then I am guilty, but I can't bring myself to regret it. For a few short weeks, I saw the enemy's face and found not hatred, but the same fragile spark that flickers in us all, the will to live, the hope to be seen as human. I will write again when I can, though I suspect tomorrow's goodbye will leave my hands too heavy for pen or paper. The trucks came at dawn. Their engines growled low in the mist, gray shapes emerging through the thin snowfall. Someone shouted for the prisoners to be ready. I'd been awake all night, waiting for morning, though I wished it would never come. Carl sat on the edge of his cot, already dressed in the rough wool uniform they'd given him. It hung loose on his shoulders, too large, too thin for the cold. He had tied a strip of bandage around his arm, where the wound was still tender. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "They said I will go south," he told me. Maybe it will be warmer there." I nodded, though I didn't know if it was true. "You'll heal better once you rest," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. The others were watching as we spoke. A few whispered under their breath, not cruelly, just uncertainly, as though they couldn't decide if what they were seeing was right. I kept my eyes on Carl's hands instead. They were rough and cracked, not so different from Father's when he worked the fields back home. I thought of that suddenly, of how many hands like his had built, and how many had destroyed, when the guards came to take him. He stood slowly, his breath catching as he buttoned his coat. He turned to me then and said, "You are the only good thing I have seen in this war." The words were quiet, but they landed heavy in my chest. I wanted to tell him not to say that, not to make me into something I wasn't, but the truth is, part of me needed to hear it. I walked beside him as far as the courtyard. The snow was melting now, turning the earth into a gray slush. The prisoners climbed into the trucks, under the watch of soldiers with rifles slung over their shoulders. The engines coughed, then roared to life. Carl hesitated before stepping onto the backboard, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a button carved roughly from wood. He pressed it into my hand. "From my sister's coat," he said. "For luck." I didn't cry until the trucks began to move. He looked back once, raising his good hand in a small wave. I waved back, though my vision blurred as he disappeared into the pale distance. The sound of the engines faded slowly, swallowed by the snow and the wind, until the world fell silent again. Afterward, the aid station felt emptier than it had in months. The cots were still full, the air still thick with disinfectant and murmured pain, but something was missing. Maybe it was the quiet sense of purpose that had filled the space when I was tending to him. Maybe it was simply the human warmth that compassion leaves behind when it's gone. Nurse Doyle found me sitting by the window later, the wooden button still in my hand. She didn't say a word, just poured 2 cups of coffee and left one beside me. The smell was faint and bitter, but it felt like a kindness. We sat that way for a long time, listening to the far-off thunder of the front. War has a way of taking everything. Mother lives, homes, even the parts of ourselves we once thought untouchable. But this morning, as I watched that truck vanish down the road, I realized it cannot take one thing, the choice to see another human being, even for a moment, as more than the uniform they wear. The war is ending, or so they say. Rumors move faster than truth in times like these, but even the air feels different now. The guns are quieter. The nights last a little longer before the distant thunder begins again. I think the world is finally tiring of its own violence. The snow has melted, leaving behind a landscape of mud and ghosts. The trees that once stood bare are budding faintly, fragile green, pushing through the gray. I walk past the old schoolhouse sometimes, our aid station. It's nearly empty now, only a few stretchers left in the hall, the air still smelling faintly of ether and ash. I don't know where most of the men went. Some back home, some to graves without names. The rest of us remain in this in-between, not yet released from duty, not yet certain who will be when peace finally comes. I still think of Carl more often than I should, perhaps. I wonder if he made it through the winter, if his arm healed properly, if he still carries his sister's songs somewhere inside him. Sometimes I imagine him stepping off another truck, far from here, breathing free air again. Other times, I remind myself not to dream too kindly in a world that's given so little reason to. A few weeks ago, a column of liberated prisoners passed through our sector. Their faces were hollow, their eyes wide and lost, as if they'd forgotten how to see the sky. I looked among them, though I didn't expect to find him. I didn't. But there was a young man who smiled when he saw the red cross on my arm. "You're American?" he asked in halting English. I nodded. "Then thank you," he said. I never learned his name, but the way he said those words, quiet, reverent, like a prayer, reminded me of Carl. It's strange how gratitude can sound the same in any language. Sometimes I wonder what this war will leave in its wake. The towns can be rebuilt, the bridges mended, but what of the hearts that have been hollowed out? How do we learn to trust again, to forgive? There's no medicine for that, only time and small acts of grace, if we're brave enough to give them. Last night, I dreamed of home. The porch light glowed against the dark, and I heard your voice calling me in from the fields. Everything smelled of lilacs and rain. It was so vivid that when I woke, for a moment I believed I was really there. But the sound outside was not rain, only the wind moving through the broken rafters. I sat up and watched the pale dawn creep across the room, and I thought of something Carl once said. It is beautiful when it hides everything. Perhaps he was right. Maybe beauty is what helps us forget, but I think I've learned something different. Beauty is what helps us remember that even in the ruins there was once tenderness, that even in the cruelty of war there were hands that mended instead of destroyed. I don't know what the world will call people like me, fools, maybe for showing mercy to the enemy. But if being a fool means believing that compassion matters more than vengeance, then I will carry that name gladly. Because when this is all over, and the uniforms are gone, and the graves are grassed over, what will remain of us are the moments we chose kindness, even when the world told us not to. I will be home soon, Mother. When I arrive, I don't want to talk about battles or medals or loss. I only want to sit with you in the quiet and feel the warmth of being human again. With all my love, Anna. They found her letters months after the guns had fallen silent. The satchel that held them was buried beneath a collapsed wall of the old schoolhouse, its leather cracked and stiff from the winter. Inside were bandages, a broken pair of scissors, and a stack of papers tied with a strip of linen, pages written in a neat, careful hand. Each began the same way. Dear Mother, no one knows what became of Anna, the American nurse who chose mercy in a place built on hate. Some say she returned home quietly, blending into a world eager to forget. Others believe she stayed behind, tending to the wounded until the war truly ended. Of the German soldier she saved, the boy named Carl, there is no record, only the memory of his name written once at the bottom of a page. Historians will tell us wars are won by strategy and numbers, by men with guns and generals with maps. But somewhere beyond those lines, in the shadows between victory and loss, there live smaller triumphs, quiet acts of grace that never make it into history books. Anna's story is one of them, a moment of light in a world gone dark, proof that even when humanity seemed buried beneath rubble and rage, it still breathed in the hands of a woman who chose to heal rather than hate. Her words survive now as a whisper, across time, not of war, but of what it means to remain human within it. And maybe that is where the truest peace begins. Not in treaties or parades, but in the hearts of those who, even for a moment, refuse to let compassion die.